Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Lagos, there lived a man named Chief Ebuka. Years ago, Ibu was a poor, struggling trader who sold spare parts at a Ladipo market. Back then, his wife, Neka, stood by him through the storms, waking early to fry akara and sell in front of their one-room apartment just to support the family. They didn't have much, but love, patience, and teamwork held them together. She would pray for him, cook for him, and even loan him her savings when he was short on goods. And when he finally got his big break, an international contract that changed his fortune, Neka was there, dancing and praising God with him. But as the money grew, so did Ebuka's pride. The man who once wept in his wife's arms after a long day at the market now barely acknowledged her. Money had begun to whisper lies into his ears. He didn't forget where he came from. He just chose to ignore it. Chief Ebuka's mansion in Lekki. Phase 1 was the envy of many. High white gates, tall palm trees, imported furniture, and a fleet of luxury cars parked outside. But inside, there was no peace. Neka, the same woman who helped him build his empire, was now treated like an old servant. She moved around the house quietly, with her head low, avoiding his outbursts. Ebuka barely spoke to her. When he did, it was to complain about the taste of his food, her dressing, or how she embarrassed him in front of his rich friends. She no longer sat at the same table with him when guests came. In fact, he now introduced her as the mother of his children instead of his wife. Neka watched, heart heavy, as he entertained younger ladies with polished nails and fake accents. They laughed at jokes he used to tell her. Ebuka had become a man she no longer recognized, and every night she cried in silence, wondering where the man she married had gone. But the gods are never asleep, and karma, it walks slowly, but it never forgets an address. One cool evening, Neka's elderly mother came visiting from the village. Wrinkled and wise, she had seen more storms than the sky itself. She sat with Ebuka in the sitting room and looked him in the eye. "My son," she said softly, "wealth is sweet, but pride will bring you down faster than poverty ever did. Respect the woman who suffered with you, or the gods will teach you what you refuse to learn." Ebuka laughed, a loud, mocking laugh that echoed through the marble-tiled room. "Mama, let me take care of your daughter my own way. I didn't become who I am by listening to people like you." Neka's mother sighed. She looked at her daughter with eyes full of sadness, then stood to leave. "A tree that forgets its roots will fall. Not if, but when," she said as she walked out. Ebuka didn't even bother to escort her. He was too busy on the phone, talking to one of his girlfriends, planning a weekend getaway in Dubai. He didn't know that with every arrogant word, he was digging the pit he would one day fall into. It was a high-profile event. Ebuka had been invited as a keynote speaker at a Billionaire summit in Victoria Island. The cameras flashed, the media roared, and celebrities mingled. He arrived in style, stepping out of a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, flanked by his young assistant and a model-like lady in a red dress. But just as he approached the red carpet, the lady slipped. Her high heels snapped. She crashed to the floor and dragged Ebuka with her. Paparazzi didn't miss a second. He stood up angrily, dusted his suit, and shouted at her without shame. "You fool! You ruined my entrance!" Gasps filled the air. Everyone saw it, even the media. Neka, who had stayed home, saw the trending video within hours. The comments poured in. "How can a man disgrace a woman like this? No home training. Money doesn't buy class." Ebuka shrugged it off. But a small crack had begun in his image, and like glass, it would soon shatter completely. Late one night, Ebuka received a call from one of his overseas business partners. The voice on the line was cold and sharp. "Chief, we need to talk. The authorities are questioning your financial transactions. Something doesn't look right. If we go down, you're going with us." Ebuka's heart skipped. He had always operated in gray areas, moving money in hidden accounts, bribing customs officers. But he never thought it would catch up with him. He barely slept that night. His hands were shaking, sweat drenched his expensive bed sheets. Still, he didn't tell Nika anything. He just barked at her the next morning for not making his tea hot enough. She didn't respond. She just looked at him, wondering what burden had put fear in his eyes. For the first time in years, Ebuka looked human. The news broke the following week. One of Ebuka's biggest deals, a luxury real estate project in Banana Island, had collapsed. Government agents raided the site. Allegations of fraud, fake documents, stolen funds. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire developer under investigation. That morning, Ebuka tried calling his lawyer. No answer. He called his accountant. Switched off. He reached out to his flashy friends, the ones who used to laugh loudly at his jokes and drink his expensive champagne. None of them picked up. For the first time, the mansion felt like a prison. Silence echoed louder than ever. Neka sat in the garden, quietly watering her flowers. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The fall had begun. By the next morning, Chief Ebuka's worst fears became reality. His phone buzzed non-stop with alerts, not from bank credits, but from restrictions. One after the other, his accounts were frozen. His international business card stopped working. Even his private jets were grounded due to unpaid clearance fees. In panic, he drove to the bank himself. The manager, who once called him "Sir" with a smile, barely shook his hand. "Chief, I'm sorry. It's from the top. There's nothing we can do. EFCC is watching everything." Ebuka stood there, stunned. The same man who once boasted about buying 3 cars in one day now had no access to a single naira. He drove back home in silence, fists clenched on the steering wheel. At the gate, his security guard greeted him with fear in his voice. "Oga." Some men in black suits came earlier. They asked questions. Ebuka didn't respond. He walked inside, past Neka, who simply looked up from her Bible and whispered under her breath, "The wind has come." Before evening, the once busy mansion turned into a ghost house. The chef left without notice. The driver didn't return from his break. Even the cleaner, who had worked there for 3 years, packed her bag and left quietly. Ebuka called one of them, angry. "You didn't even say goodbye?" "Sorry, sir," the boy replied. "I need to take care of my family. I know one involved for Wahala." Ebuka threw his phone across the room. By nightfall, only 2 people remained in that big house. Ebuka and the woman he had treated like a shadow, Neka. She made a simple dinner, yam porridge with scent leaf, and placed it on the table. For the first time in years, Ebuka sat without argument and ate, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. Neka didn't speak, but her silence was louder than any lecture. 2 days later, just as Ebuka was trying to contact another business partner, the front door opened. It was Inspector Haruna from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. With him were 4 other officers. "Chief Ebuka, you're under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You are to come with us." The world stood still. He looked around for help. No lawyer, no friends, not even a house staff to delay the officers. Only Neka stood in the corridor, her wrapper tied neatly, her hands clasped. He looked at her, eyes begging for something. Mercy, strength, anything. She met his gaze and said softly, "You built a palace and forgot your foundation. Now it's falling on your head." As they led him away in handcuffs, paparazzi took pictures again, but this time no red carpet, no smiles, just a lesson beginning its course. The police station was nothing like the luxury Ebuka was used to. The cell was small, the air was thick, and the walls smelled of sweat and regret. He sat on the bare floor, back against the wall, surrounded by men he would never have allowed near him in his glory days. Someone offered him a sachet of water. He hesitated, then accepted. For the first time in a long while, he realized how empty his pride was. In that moment, stripped of titles and wealth, Chief Ebuka became just a man who had laughed at the warnings, a man who had forgotten kindness. Neka visited that evening. She stood on the other side of the bars, calm, firm, and dignified. "Do you need anything?" she asked. Ebuka couldn't meet her eyes. His voice was weak. I'm sorry, Neka." She nodded quietly. "Apology is the beginning, but you still have a long way to go." Then she handed over a small flask of hot jollof rice, the same meal she used to make back when they had nothing. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, former clients, and even neighbors from his estate had come to watch the mighty Chief Ebuka stand in the dock like an ordinary man. The charges were read out: overinflated contracts, ghost companies, tax evasion. Ebuka tried to defend himself. His lawyers painted him as a victim of betrayal by subordinates, but the evidence was heavy. Too many documents, too many secrets brought into the light. Neka sat quietly at the back of the court, her face expressionless. She didn't come to mock. She came because no matter what, she once loved this man. Still, he had to walk through the fire he set for himself. As the judge postponed the final ruling, Ebuka was escorted out again. Cameras flashed. This time, no cheers, just whispers. "The mighty has fallen." After weeks in detention and back and forth in court, Ebuka was granted bail. Not because of money, he had none left. It was Neka who posted her late father's land as collateral. She signed the documents without saying much, just did it. He returned home, not to a mansion filled with laughter, but to silence. The electricity had been disconnected. The generators sold. The compound, once spotless, was overgrown with weeds. He entered the living room and sat on the cold floor. Tears filled his eyes. "I lost everything," he said out loud. "Everything." Then a soft voice replied from behind, "Number, you still have the chance to find yourself." It was Neka. She didn't say more. She just walked into the kitchen to prepare dinner. As the smell of egusi soup filled the air, Ebuka realized something. Maybe this was not his end. Maybe this was his chance to start again, the right way. Ebuka began to wake up earlier than usual. There were no more maids, no personal assistant, no chef. He swept the compound with his own hands, wiped dusty windows, and fetched water from the tank. Each task felt strange at first, like punishment, but slowly they began to shape him. One morning, he watched Neka wash clothes by hand. He walked over and picked up a bucket. "Let me help," he said. She paused, surprised. He knelt by her side and began to scrub. Not perfectly, not quickly, but genuinely. As they worked, silence wrapped around them. But it wasn't the bitter silence of before. It was a new one, peaceful, cautious, and hopeful. That day, for the first time in years, Neka smiled at him. Just a little, but it was enough to warm a cold heart. One weekend, Ebuka insisted they visit Neka's village. He hadn't been there in over 10 years, not since he became too big for such places. They arrived in an old Toyota Corolla, borrowed from a neighbor. No flashy convoy, no security, just the two of them. The villagers came out, surprised. Children stared, elders watched. The same man who once ignored their greetings now walked with his head low, greeting everyone with respect. He stood before Neka's mother and knelt down. Mama, I was foolish. I lost my way. Please forgive me. The old woman looked at him for a long time. Then she placed her hand on his head. This is the man my daughter married. May your senses never leave you again. Neka's eyes welled with tears, not from pain this time, but healing. Back in Lagos, Ebuka decided to start from scratch. No shortcuts, no shady deals. He used his business experience to help small traders in the community, charging nothing, just teaching. He mentored young boys who wanted to enter the spare parts business, just like he once did. A few months passed. Word spread. People began to trust him again. Little by little, his name began to rise, not as a billionaire, but as a man of integrity. Neka stood by him every day, this time not as a helper behind the scenes, but beside him, hand in hand. Their house was still modest, the cars were still old, but the peace that filled their home was richer than gold. And for the first time in a long time, Ebuka slept peacefully at night. One hot afternoon, while Neka was cooking, the gate creaked open. Ebuka stood outside, talking to someone. Neka peeked from the window and froze. It was Amaka, the glamorous lady who once replaced her at public events, the same one who laughed beside Ebuka in expensive cars and parties. Amaka was no longer glowing. Her makeup was forced, her eyes tired, her designer bag peeling at the edges. I heard you were down, she said softly. I came to check on you. Ebuka kept his voice low and polite. Thank you, Amaka, but I'm fine now. She moved closer, a smile playing on her lips. We made a great team once. We can again. He stepped back and pointed to the house. My wife is inside. She stood by me when everyone left. I can't betray her again. Amaka blinked. Humiliated, she turned and left, heels clicking against the ground, the sound of a door closing. For good. One evening, a man walked into the small community shop Ebuka had helped build. He wore a simple outfit, but his eyes held weight. Are you Chief Ebuka? The man asked. Ebuka nodded slowly. I'm the CEO of a microfinance bank. I've been watching how you help young traders. We need someone like you to run a new entrepreneurship program. You won't get rich overnight, but it's honest, impactful work. Ebuka smiled, heart beating fast. I accept. That night, he told Neka. She simply nodded and said, You're becoming a man I can be proud of again. They held hands on the balcony, watching the moon rise slowly, not as rulers of the world, but as partners, equal, healed, whole. At a community award ceremony months later, Neka was called to the stage. The announcer said, For her strength, humility, and quiet leadership, we present the Community Pillar Award to Madam Neka Ebuka. As she walked up, everyone clapped, including Ebuka, tears in his eyes. She spoke only a few words. When a house starts shaking, don't abandon it. Reinforce the foundation. Sometimes that means staying. Sometimes that means standing firm until the roof learns to value the ground beneath it. The crowd rose to its feet. Ebuka, sitting in the front row, knew she wasn't just his wife. She was his saving grace. With his new job at the microfinance bank, Ebuka traveled to local markets, not in convoys, but in buses and okadas. He sat with young traders, listening to their stories, teaching them how to grow and manage money honestly. No more flashy suits, just simple shirts and truth. He came home every evening, dusty but satisfied. Neka would have dinner ready, and they would sit on the floor like they used to when they were newlyweds. There was laughter now, real laughter, not the kind covered in fake smiles and camera flashes. Do you miss the billions? Neka asked one night. Ebuka thought for a moment and replied, I miss being respected, but this time I'm earning it with my heart, not my wallet. She smiled. Then you are richer than ever. Ebuka decided to visit those he had hurt, his old driver, the cleaner, even his younger cousin, whom he once insulted for being small-minded. He sat before each of them, not as a boss, but as a man asking for forgiveness. Most were shocked. Some cried. A few couldn't forgive just yet, but they respected the effort. In the past, Ebuka used to hand out money to silence guilt. Now he offered sincerity, eye contact, and words from a humbled soul. Back at home, he told Neka about each visit. She listened with quiet pride. You're shedding your old skin, she said, and the new one fits you better. Months later, an international investor who had once done business with Ebuka returned to Nigeria. He approached him with an offer. Millions, a new office, luxury again. But part of the deal required shady shortcuts. Old Ebuka would have jumped in, but this time he leaned back and said, Thank you, but no. The man was stunned. You're really not the same, are you? Ebuka chuckled. I lost everything before, not because I didn't have money, but because I had no wisdom. I won't make that mistake again. That evening, he told Neka what he turned down. She held his hand and whispered, Now I know you'll never fall again, because this time you're standing on truth. They sat side by side, no longer defined by wealth or fame, but by peace, the kind money can't buy. A year had passed. The community now saw Ebuka differently, not as chief, not as the billionaire who once ruled headlines, but as a mentor, a helper, a man they could trust. He had no convoy, no mansion, but he had peace. He woke up early, prayed with Neka, and spent his days helping others rise. People began to say, if Ebuka could change, anyone can. One afternoon, a group of university students visited for an interview. Sir, one asked, what's the greatest thing you ever earned in your life? Ebuka smiled. My wife's forgiveness and my own conscience. They clapped. But it was Neka, standing quietly behind them with a tray of zobo and groundnuts, who smiled the widest. One weekend, Ebuka and Neka visited a youth seminar to speak on marriage and money. The crowd was large, young couples, struggling traders, hopeful dreamers. Neka spoke first. Don't marry for title, marry for truth. And don't forget to listen to the quiet voice of love, even when the world is loud with pride. Ebuka stood beside her. Success without humility is like a car without brakes. It will run fast, but it will crash eventually. They spoke for hours, sharing their scars, their mistakes, their growth. And at the end, people didn't applaud just because they were inspired. They applauded because they saw hope. On a peaceful Sunday evening, Ebuka and Neka sat in front of their small house, watching the children from the neighborhood run around. A little girl ran up and handed Neka a flower. My mommy says you're the strongest woman she knows. Neka smiled and gave the flower to Ebuka. Ebuka laughed. So I can remember that strength built this home. They looked at each other. No words needed. He had been taught a bitter lesson, one that stripped him down, broke his pride, and nearly destroyed his life. But through that fire, a better man emerged, and beside him stood the woman who never gave up on him, even when the world did.